Alrighty, well, let's get right into it then. And as always, we're going to launch into our recap, and we cut that out and host it separately on YouTube. So if you're on just the recap video and you want to hear our full thoughts on this episode, it will be linked in the description box below. You want to take us off today, my friend?
Yeah. I had this weird joke of being like, no.
Just
And be
leave the
like,
call.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So thanks for coming to our recap with that weird joke at the start. So this episode opened up with the picking up on the climax of the previous episode, with essentially we had Ursulon confronting the wizard Pain over his dealings with Will Gallows, and seemingly Pain beginning to frame Ursulon in an attack on himself. And that is indeed what happens. As we saw, Pain is going to slice himself with his dagger and immediately is going to fire this electric bolt at Ursulon. And I think it's something like 9 points of damage. It's a lot. Almost his entire health pool. Meanwhile, we have Ame and Suvi, who are essentially rushing down the hallway, trying to get to them in time. And also we have Ursulon, who's going to cast in a similar way that he did back in the prequel or the starting episode, is going to cast invisibility. And there's a lot of mom energy that comes from Suvi this episode. So he basically runs down to mom to be like, hey, I need some help. The fox is going to stay in there. Pain kind of panics, realizing that, okay, I just lost this person who just saw me attack them. So he's actually going to shut the door, lock it, and according to the fox, things get very hot very quickly. Come to find out that Pain is actually burning all of the evidence in his office of the supposed embezzlement that has been occurring, the manipulating of the books that he's been doing. Ursulon, in a very anti-critical way, seems to have no problem breaking down this door, and is going to throw his body at it, knock this door down, and the combat is going to ensue. The highlight of this combat is going to be our Archmage apprentice, Suvi, doing a magic missile attack on Pain. And there's also a moment, by the way, where Pain gets throat lunged by our favorite fox. And we have this moment where we find out the fox only has 2 hit points, in which
Yikes.
Pain is actually going to attack the fox and fortunately misses. So the fox survives, even though there was a moment that everyone was like, it's episode 8, please don't kill the fox. Anyway, this magic missile is going to hit. It's going to knock Pain out. And the party essentially, well, really, Ursulon and Ame feel sorry for the wizard or the guild mage. And Ursulon is going to use Lay on Hands to bring him back. There's a moment where Pain is considering continuing to fight for his life, where Ame basically, through a persuasion check, is like, hey, you've lost. We can figure something out. Don't do this. Around this time, Moro is going to arrive with the other mages and are basically like, what's going on? And they see Pain there on the ground, like blood flowing from his mouth, deep wounds from the arcane missiles, ash in the office. And this persuasion check works, and Pain basically tells a story of, yeah, we were having a little roughhousing in the office, and me and Ursulon are actually both from the same area in Silbury, and we love to play indoor croquet. And basically gives like this whole hijink of a explanation of what happened, and is like, yeah, and then at one point Ursulon had my dagger, and I turned and accidentally walked into it, and then I shot myself by mistake with arcane missiles. And Suvi is so disgusted at this silly story that she's actually she pockets the dagger. She's going to walk out and kind of storm off. And Ame and Ursulon are like, yeah, that's what happened. And Mora was like, as you would expect, there's no place for this kind of tomfoolery in the Scepter's chorus. Like, how could you guys do something like this? And basically is going to go off to retrieve Suvi. So as he leaves, Ame and Ursulon basically have this conversation with Payne, where Payne's like, "Hey, so like, tell me about what do you know about Will Gallows? Like, what's happening here?" And they basically explain like he has something that we need, and part of our mission is turning you over, and you have a chance now to you have a chance, like, we're not going to kill you, but use it wisely. And Payne basically says, well, I have some documents that would be really valuable to Will Gallows in the library. I can go get it for you. And both of them had an insight check that was very high, and they realized that this is someone who is grasping at straws, totally BSing, is just trying to get away as fast as possible. Ame's insightful to this and basically is like, hey, seriously, like, this is your only chance. Like, we've done our duty. Your best chance is just to run and just get out of here. So Payne kind of just like, all right, well, see you later, and like runs off. Meanwhile, Suvi is approached by Moro, and there's kind of this conversation where it's like, hey, what's going on here? This is wild. And Suvi is like, hey, I have to be honest, and basically reveals a little bit of what she's been hiding, which is we were sent here because we were suspicious of embezzlement. I sent Ursulon to confront Payne, and then he attacked him. We find out that Moro's not the sharpest tool in the box, because Moro's like, oh my gosh, well then why were they playing indoor croquet? And Suvi's like, well, they weren't. That was the cover. And then he's like, but why did he shoot himself? It was very like why male models energy in this conversation. All that to say, Moro's grateful and basically is like, hey, well, I know you guys have had a tough night, but we still should go see what we've been working on in the Derrig. There's some very exciting things happening. So they have a couple hours to kill before they do that. Suvi's going to go back to Ursulon and Ame. And as she's approaching, Ursulon and Ame have this great conversation about how, hey, it really kind of feels like Suvi is kind of always looking out for us, and we want to kind of pick up our weight a bit more, and like not necessarily like be the one that she's always having to save, but really, carry our weight, so to speak. Around this time, Suvi arrives, and they begin to head off to the armory to gear up before this adventure. And why don't you take it from there?
Yes, sir. So on that same note, where they want to be able to do more, that's why this armory comes into play. And Suvi's like, I basically run this joint. Like, we can go get stuff from the armory. So they head there, and it's a lot more ostentatious than they presumed. It's just kind of like a small, quaint room, and Brennan basically has everyone roll investigation checks, and it's based on those checks, what they kind of find in here, what they discover. Um, and a part of this also is that there is like a ledger that marks like what goes in and out of the armory, and so Suvi knows that her station here kind of allows her to do whatever she wants, but she also realizes that like if they just clean out this whole place, like someone is going to face consequences for that. So she is going to kind of take a note of everything that they end up taking from here. And one of the first things they do see are these large staves that the Azure Battalion uses. They're colloquially, I can never say that word. They're called matchsticks. It's kind of their nicknames, and they are basically these war mage staffs that let you be more proficient with cantrips. And Brennan hands Aabria a little like index card for the stave, and actually, as part of the Patreon, they sent out like the actual stats for all of these items that they end up getting, which I don't want to like go over that here because I know that's like paywalled content, and I don't want to just like say it here. But for those of you that are patrons, definitely check that out because they're pretty cool. So they see the staves, and then Ame is really impressed with these in particular because their magical enchantment is permanent. Unlike the things she creates, which are basically like a one-time use or at least a limited use. So she actually wants to take one of these herself, kind of to just study it and learn more about how this type of magic operates. So they actually take two, one for Ame and I believe one for Ursulon. Then based on Ame's check, she also finds this stack of fabric that's on this chair that look like bandanas. And we find out that these are witchfire veils, which they're basically kind of like masks for using around magical smoke, such as witchfire. So she takes, I believe, 4 of those. Um, Suvi finds some golden bracers that would actually fit around Ursulon, because one of the things that happens when they come in here, Ursulon in particular is very excited about perhaps getting some new armor or just getting some new gear. But they come into this armory, which is essentially an armory for wizards. So it's not really geared out with things that somebody like Ursulon could use, especially in the sense of things that would fit him. Like there's mention of boots and different jackets, but they're all far too small for someone of Ursulon's stature. These bracers, however, that Suvi finds will actually fit, and they have a minor abjuration on them, we are told. Ursulon finds a drawer full of magical rings, and there seem to be 3 types in here: bronze, copper, and coral. There's kind of a big info dump here with these rings, and like I mentioned in the Patreon, you get a fuller breakdown of them. But from what's revealed in the episode itself, we know that there are bronze, copper, and coral, and the bronze rings are known as steward's rings, and they're basically for people who are going to be carrying heavy loads, doing cargo shipments, loading, unloading, basically. Then we have the copper rings, which are scouts rings, and we're told those are for people who are like on watch duty, scouting duty, guard duty, things like that, with the general idea being that they probably increase your perception in some way. And then finally, we have the coral rings, which are known as sailors' rings, which Suvi hasn't heard of before. But we basically come to find out that these kind of let you breathe underwater. Um, Suvi knows that it's only safe to wear 2 of these magical rings at once, and we know that these are Citadel made and mass produced, and they're basically made to just bolster non-combat abilities for people. She also tells Ursulon that these will resize to fit him, and she gives him a Scout's ring, which is the one that will help with perception. And so Ursulon takes that one, and then he takes the coral one, which lets you breathe underwater. Ame, however, takes a bronze and a copper. So the Scout's ring and then the Steward ring, which is for carrying heavy loads and stuff. And as soon as she puts those on, she starts to kind of sweat profusely and feel a bit sick to her stomach. And Suvi knows that there's a bit of a process to getting attuned to this ring, and that that's normal. Ame is then like, I wonder if these would work on non-humans, thinking that she might try to get the fox to wear one of these cargo rings to bolster him up a bit. But they ultimately decide, I think, not to at the time. Oh, it's because they ask the fox, "Are you down to wear a ring?" And he's like, "No, I don't like clothes." And so that doesn't pan out. But one other thing that happens in here is I believe Erika passes a note to Brennan because she is attempting to steal something, but she is not successful as Ursulon and Suvi both notice her do this, and she steals some sort of jacket, we're told. Then they take about the next hour, and again, Suvi marks all of this down in the ledger, and she herself actually does not take a single thing. Um, but having gotten all this new gear, they then take about the next hour to attune to the various things that they got. And during this time, Suvi says that she takes the book that has the collection of her parents' things in it. She says she's going to take that, and so she tries to just hide it amongst her things. And at the end of this hour, Ame now is ripped. She has all these new muscles as she has now successfully attuned to this bronze ring. And we are told she now has a strength score of 19, which is
for level
massive.
1. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, and higher than Ursulon even. So after this, they go and get on a carriage and are heading toward the port to go to the Wizard Derricks. And on the way, Suvi notices a Citadel carriage parked at the governor's mansion. And because she has the observant feat, she's able to read the lips of the driver of the carriage who is speaking to someone. And he says, "As you wish, Abjur Galani. I believe they should be outside sooner than later. I heard from someone that the Scepter's chorus," and then it gets cut off because Suvi's carriage kind of turns a corner and she can't see anymore. So Suvi believes that what happened with Pain and the Scepter's chorus in them has already made the rounds in terms of gossip. But before they can get too much into that, they have arrived at the port. and they board a ship to head out to the Wizard's Derricks. And Moro tells Suvi, like, hey, we were unable to capture Pain, but we got this wanted poster, like, we're making moves on it, and it will be taken care of. Suvi's like, I consider it handled, don't worry about it. So the ship arrives at this massive structure that Brennan describes as four steel beams that kind of all come to a point like a pyramid, like a tall, narrow pyramid that's also hollow. And it basically just has all these platforms in it. And in the center of each platform is this like glass crystal disc that's basically like a lens that you can see through, and you can look up and see all the way to the top no matter which platform you're on. And at the very top are these lights that they've been seeing out at sea each night. And there's these basically prism looking lights that seemingly blast light down through these lenses to make something happen. And there's also rune work that they can see on each of these crystal glass discs. So at the top, which is where everyone travels, they travel to the very top, the highest platform. Moro says, like, it's about to begin. Welcome to the, I might butcher this, the Calabel Notomantic apparatus. Um,
Nailed
he
it.
says he says it took 3.5 years to build, but the enchanting could only begin in the last year. So he's like, I could explain more, but it would be better for you just to experience it. Let the wonder begin. And he claps, and these attendant mages on the various levels begin to chant, and Moro even begins to chant, and these light prisms overhead begin to rotate, and the lenses begin to shift, and this basically, the way I envision it, is this beam of light goes down through these lenses into the water below, and it causes this white foam to start coming up from the waves, which builds and builds. And Brennan describes it as this light zooming down and kind of displacing the water down to the bottom of the ocean floor, maybe a couple 100 feet down. And what is revealed down here is this gargantuan form, bigger than a ship, just massive. And it's kind of moving with breath or palpitation, but there's no face. There's hundreds of tendrils coming off of it, and it's described as like red and cream stripes on its colorization. And it's basically just this massive Leviathan sea monster. And at the front of its body, he describes a series of bioluminescent lights that are kind of lighting up, and a massive tail tucked underneath itself. Just this massive creature, unlike anything they've seen before. And underneath it, where its body comes into contact with the ocean floor, this coral is growing up, basically growing up from anywhere this thing's body touches. And the source of the coral, at the source of it, is like this glimmering blue light that seems to be kind of soaking out from this Leviathan's body. And at the base of the derrick, the coral is being carved away. And as the light from the prism touches the creature, it's kind of pushed down, and everything is kind of like reverberating from the impact. Moro at this point is like smiling and weeping with joy, and Suvi just asks, "What have you done?" And that's where the episode ends. Once again, episode 8 of The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One, The Catch. Again, if you're on the recap and want to hear our full discussion, it'll be linked down below. But let's get into it, man.